probably familiar with Fridays for Future or School Strikes for Climate. These actions and movements that have galvanized an entire generation across the world to care about the climate, care about the future of the planet, and to do something about it by coming together, which is really in the spirit of what we're trying to do today with all of you. But the presence of Luisa and Helena here in the United States is because of work they're doing with the Heinrich Böll Foundation, partners of ours in this. So we're really grateful that these activities are intersecting and give us this opportunity to create new relationships and connections among all of you. So we are going to sit down and have a brief chat. Luisa is joining us for, I think, the first time today. So it might be a great opportunity to get her caught up as to what we've been talking about as well. But we really want to spend this last session together, learning from them, talking with them, finding out what they've learned about the United States over their last few weeks here touring around the East Coast, and finding ways that we can support each other. Because as we've been saying throughout the day, there is a lot of great local action happening, both in Germany and the United States. How do we connect to each other through that? So hopefully we'll take that away from this conversation. But I'm going to move over here. We're going to make this a little more casual. And I certainly want to invite all of you, I'm sorry, Max, thank you, to ask some questions, to offer some comments, to share your experiences from today and also from outside of here, to have a robust chat. But first, welcome Luisa, welcome Helena, welcome to the band. Hi.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm great. It's so great to join you guys. I'm sorry for such a delay. Maybe I'm sure that has been mentioned. I am. There's a lot of we work in Germany usually, and so right now there's lots of going on in Germany. So I'm kind of always on both continents. And today there's a big conference in Germany that I have to join. So before. And I'm finishing a book as well, so that's been a bit of a run this morning. It's super nice to be here. Yes.
I think it's Friday afternoon, so it's nice to be around a friendly group of people. And good, I'm glad you were able to come in. Helena, what have you taken away? You've been with us for most of the day today. Welcome, and what have you taken away from it so
far? Great cookies. I feel really honored to be in the space with you all because I feel like, so many wise things have been said already, and which one do I pick? I wrote a few things down. I wrote down change comes from an edge. That was really powerful. I wrote down we're not trying to take jobs but to save lives. I thought that was really powerful. And then I really liked I hate Formosa plastics, they keep me going. I think the determination and the honesty that has been present here is I think what we need when things get really hard.
So Luisa, what have you taken so far from your time in the United States? So Helena gave us a brief look at today. Can you give us an overview?
Maybe before we get to that, briefly talk about our work and what we do? Because maybe not everyone knows that, right?
I would love that.
Yeah.
Why don't I give you to the stage? Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're doing, how you got started, and give us an introduction to your climate activism?
Yes, I can do that. So Helena and me, we are both a part of the climate movement of Germany. We're the largest climate movement in the country, and by numbers, I guess, even of Europe. We mobilize on the streets usually like twice a year. We've been doing this for 6 years, but mostly, and that's, our theory of change is we create spaces for people to get angry, hopeful, and active. And we demonstrate people's willingness to fight and to love the world and to push for policy changes and radical ideas while coming with us on the streets, while taking that space, while using their bodies to be present in those political spaces. But more than that, a lot of what we do is create cultural, normative, social change around questions of climate justice. And our base of work is basically young people, so we mobilize really across the country in young generations, but that's really for us the starting point. And then there's a wide network in all generations and really all corners of societies where we collaborate, where we organize, where we work together with unions and churches and football clubs and all these kind of different organizations. And now we've been doing this, as I mentioned, for quite a while, and we've seen Germany kind of transforming ecologically quite a bit. So when we started off, there was a Merkel government that, well, you know, had climate on maybe one paper and had this one trip to some glaciers where Merkel would stand at the ice shields, and, you know, everyone just assumed it would go well from there, you know, what can go wrong? And it didn't, and then we emerged together with many others and organized for Germany to really take responsibility as an historic emitter, as a country that is still exploiting around the world, whose wealth is built on the pillars of exploitation and climate injustice. And we really wanted to bring back this understanding of what does it mean to be a country like Germany in the 21st century. And so from this Merkel era, we kind of fought for climate to be a number one voter issue for elections, which meant for the first time climate was an issue that would win you an election. Whereas in contrast, it was long considered to be that one issue that you would always lose on. We managed to get Germany towards exiting coal energy, which is we're one of the largest producers of lignite, or the largest consumers of lignite coal, and now we're gonna probably end coal burning in 2030, at least in West Germany, and so on and so forth. And now we, a few years ago, even fought for a government which is, well, technically I would say as progressive as it gets. Just today now we are thinking it might collapse a year early, but maybe that's, I don't know, karma. Yes, and so that's what we do, but we have found it very difficult in recent years to navigate as a social movement that is so broad, that has to align with so many different views in a social and political environment that is getting very much attacked by the far right, that is really getting to the wheels of fake news, AI, people turning away from each other, a new wave of, far right conspiracy, hatred against everything. We are a very racist country in Germany, so we're operating in an environment that really has to, we're unlearning a lot of racism is part of that constant work, and it's very easy for populists to kind of bring in all the resentments against migrants, asylum seekers, one of the countries that used to host quite a few people. And so we came to the US really with this idea that this is a space where some of the troubles that we are facing are even more severe. And the tension is even stronger between extreme weather and extreme right, and where fake news isn't something that we're learning about, but what we are already part of. And so that is a curiosity. We brought to this continent, we took 2 months off to dig deep, to meet as many people as possible, to meet activists and groups and see different places and try to get an understanding of what are approaches and solutions and kind of answers to these times, and maybe stuff that we can kind of bring back home. And maybe just to kind of reflect on your question, I think one thing we really thought really I think will stick with us is the question of language. So we talked to so many people who've explained to us that you can't say climate anymore because the Republicans won't like it, so you say nature, and then you don't talk about green energy, you talk about clean energy because it's less ideological and so on. And we found, and then on the other side, we see many movements being very explicit about injustices, about intersectionalities, about naming what is out there. And we found that there's actually quite a good case in this country to see that when you give up your own language for some kind of apparent compromise, you're giving up your identity in a sense as well, because that's what language is. It forms and shapes realities, it forms truths. It's something that the far right is really fighting against right now, trying to push back on the language that we use and trying to trick the progressive kind of folks into this idea that it would be rational and realistic to make a compromise on something that is so fundamental as the words as we use. And I think it's something similar we're seeing in Germany right now, where we're constantly asked to slow down on our language to a point that I think if we just go down with that, in a few years' time we won't even be able to describe anything out there anymore, because for someone it's too ideological.
We were in our small groups during Anelia's workshop, we were talking about one of the questions that she posed to us was, what do we know is true right now? What do we know that is true as we are? And one of the comments that was made at our table was this inability to describe how things are, and even this projection onto these overly broad concepts which make us feel too small to do anything about it. How do you, like the economy or the climate, they become these monsters, so to speak. How do you keep language, or what language do you use, or ways of communicating do you employ to keep people engaged in that and aware of their own power in confronting that?
I think one of the things and I had to think a lot about that when you were talking about like when you started, finding out about what was going on in your communities. We really didn't know what we were doing either when we started building this movement. We knew we were really angry, we knew we were really scared, we knew we were really worried, we knew we wanted our government to do something, but we did not know all the facts. We didn't even really know that much about policy at that moment, but we felt deeply like there was something wrong and our government wasn't holding up its end of the deal of taking care of the climate crisis and protecting us as young people. And so we took to the streets, and I think what we did is we really made it about us. And I think that helped kind of cut through all these big concepts and big ideas and often distracting concepts, right? Of the ice bear and the light we all need to put out and the recycling we all need to do. And we made it very human, I think. We made it about us and our ability to grow old on this planet and in this world, and what that world would look like. I think that's probably part of what we do. And to be honest, it's not an easy task, right? Because the world is complicated, and things are moving so quickly at this moment in time that it is really hard to grasp and to hold that all and to see that all and to comprehend that, all of that. And so I think to a degree we will always fail on that front, and that is okay, right? And I think what we try to do is to cut through and seeing all the complexity, to draw the red lines and to set standards and to say, this is Germany's responsibility, this is what we need to be doing, this is where we need to go, and all the complicated details, they'll work themselves out, or you guys have to do that work, but we get to say where we need to be. Yeah, maybe those thoughts. Yeah.
And anytime someone has a question, please just raise your hand or let us know. One thing that sort of jumps out of me, you're mentioning Sharon's talk earlier, and you even read something that she had said during the talk. I hate Formosa, right? That's what keeps me going. What keeps you going? Who's your Formosa in your...
Okay.
Oh, yes, fine.
What keeps me going? I sometimes think about my grandmother. She's 92 years old, and she's a very there's a word in German, and I don't think such a classic to say this word in German. No, there is it doesn't quite translate. She's not an angry woman. She's empört. She's outraged in a way that you can be over a coffee. She would have the coffee with me in all calmness, but be really outraged in that sense. And she would read this automobile newsletter every morning about the greenwashing of any kind of car in Germany, what they would, the effort that these editors would put into, like, in all creativity, describe the beauty of that specific new car that, again, completely smashed environmental regulations and so on. And she would write these really angry letters against that newspaper, and she would say, I would ask her, like, why did you do this to yourself? Over, like, your peaceful coffee in the morning, you read this, like, stupid paper. And to be, like, kind of, this is a, you remember the diesel scandal, Germany used to be quite big in, like, rigging, like, customers, so there's this whole, like, criminal side to that industry in Germany. And she would say, you know what, it gets me up in the morning, and I've got the energy for the day, and I do romanticize with that. And at the same time, I think for me, I really like science fiction. I love doing stuff that hasn't existed before. And activism is science fiction, right? It's just doing something that hasn't been there before. And I love these moments so much. And Helena and me share many of these moments when suddenly something happens, which is just all made up because we made it. Like a situation that would not be there if it wasn't for that one person to get up and for that other person to pick up the phone and the other person to write this email and for this other person to show up. And I think because we've been through so many of these moments, we very much appreciate that it's never just one moment you can pin it down to. So when we think about like our struggles in Germany, you would have thousands of people claiming that was me with that one action that I did, those are, and different, like all organizations, these things between organizations, everyone is like, oh, that was us. And I love it so much because everyone can feel that very honest feeling that it was them. And in a way, it is all true. It's all existing truth next to each other. And the beautiful kind of component to it that we try to bring into it is to make it fit with each other so it actually makes sense and it kind of flows together. And these moments, sometimes it's rain, sometimes it's over Twitter, sometimes it's on the streets in the sun. These moments are glorious, and I'm not in any way willing to give up on those moments.
Oh, now Luisa's already said something so beautiful. I don't know how I'm going to top that. I think what keeps me going is a deep feeling of responsibility, but also a deep, like, I often tell the story of, people ask all the time, right? When did you find out about the climate crisis? And I can never answer that question because the climate crisis has been part of my reality as long as I've been aware of the world. Like my parents are scientists, the climate was changing, it was quite clear what was going on. And because I knew about it so early, there was a lot of years in my life where I felt so powerless and so hopeless, and just tried to use all my energy to push those feelings away, and I had a million hobbies, and that was fine. And for me, the moment where I actually discovered this amazing truth, which is that we collectively have the power to change the world, that was I discovered a treasure box. It completely transformed me, and I don't think, that is so wonderful that we have the capacity to do that we can take ourselves seriously, that we can take responsibility, that I think it would be so hard to give up on that. And so I think the capacity to imagine a different world and the capacity to then make it is something that keeps me going. So maybe question.
I hope this wasn't discussed before I came late, but Angela Merkel has her memoir and biography coming out this month. How would you assess her, 14, 15 years? 16, sorry. And especially her views on nuclear power and eliminating that, and should we resuscitate nuclear?
I love that question. Can I do the nuclear bit? Awesome. Okay, so I love that so much because it's one question I've been asked in every room. We've been asked that in every room. Because apparently that's something that really keeps Americans up at night, is German energy first. And I haven't found a way, just to kind of maybe, in case that's an open question, Germany isn't using nuclear energy right now. The lights haven't gone off. We're using less coal than ever. 60% of our electricity is renewable. and we're gonna phase out coal. That's where we are. And we don't import nuclear energy from France as in contrast to popular assumptions by someone. It's just that there's a European grid, and so the cheapest energy will be, like the cheapest electricity will be bought through this European grid. So sometimes nuclear energy from France will like flow through Germany to go to Czech, to the Czech Republic, because their energy is so expensive, but our energy is so cheap that it's like always a more expensive choice would be to take this nuclear stuff from France, because our energy is so cheap with the renewables. Anyhow, that all I think doesn't really matter, because if there's one thing, so we get this question all the time, and I haven't found any way to talk about nuclear energy that makes sense, because I feel these are all rabbit holes and each one of us is in one. That's my assumption. I'm saying this with all respect. But I think it's a debate that is so difficult and tense, and people have brought so many forward to me, so many things that I don't even know where to start, but also where do I come from? I'm also part of a cultural background. And so in all appreciation of the cultural diversity behind these questions, there's one thing that I would really love people to know about the nuclear debate in Germany, which for me is the most important aspect. Germany has made news in the early 2000s with its renewable energy laws. Germany was the first democracy in the world that introduced a law that would subsidize renewable energies and mostly renewable electricity to a degree that it would kind of be able to compete on the market. That renewable law has been used worldwide as a template. Oh my god, that's intense. Wow, good morning. Okay. That law has been used worldwide as a template of how to create a market case for renewables. And that law has led for Germany to very much go into solar and wind. It has arguably been able to kind of really lower the costs of solar and wind. China kind of took it from there and lowered the prices even more. And I think it's fair to say that law and everything around it in Germany really got a renewable debate worldwide to a place where you could actually work with it. And if there's one thing I would love people to know is that this law and everything around it, the many, many, many small companies in Germany that popped up to produce renewables, those guys who really invested into making this case for renewables in an industrialized country like Germany, those folks were all anti-nuclear guys. Because they just didn't like nuclear so much, like they disliked nuclear so much that they wanted to create a case for something that was renewable like wind and solar. And that wasn't obviously coal because we knew about the environmental stuff. So whatever people think about the nuclear things in Germany, I think we are trying to leave that debate behind because we have so much else to worry about. We are out of nuclear, who cares? Now we have different ends to fight on. But if there's anything that people take away is maybe the appreciation that no matter where we sit on the nuclear question, that movement arguably did the world such a huge favor with mainstreaming renewables. And I sometimes feel that could be appreciated despite a distance of the nuclear question, because they really gave us something and left us something.
Is that a Merkel initiative?
No, it was a movement. It was the renewable guys that the first renewable companies in Germany were collectives. This was collectivized energy. There was basic, there was democratic, there was people coming together. My grandmother in the 90s chipping in with her friends to get the first wind turbine up in the northern part of Germany. The first wind parks in Germany, they were collective ideas. This was 92 was when my grandmother got a solar panel on her rooftop. All organized through collectives, through communities, in a way very utopian, very much democratic, solidarity, these things. Yeah. And Merkel was obviously very much opposing lots of these things, and this is why her government eventually slowed down the renewable energy transition a lot, which is why Helena will kind of make a quick point about how we think about her.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So she's a nice lady. I think we should check.
Yeah.
Decency has gone lost in politics recently, it seems. And we can really confidently state, I've met with her multiple times, I had very long conversations with her. I would meet her from time to time because she lives across the street, really. Not meet her for meetings, but bump into her mostly. And she is a very, very decent person. And I think that is something that, you know, should be standard, but it's not clearly in politics. So.
No, thanks for that disclaimer. I think that is really important. And I mean, she was also really funny, right? Like,
She's
I think
humorous.
forget that. Yeah. Yeah. So while she was very nice, she was very ineffective in fighting the climate crisis. Louisa and I both grew up, right? We didn't even really know that that someone else could be chancellor. Like, we just
Not even
always,
speaking of men.
yeah, we didn't even know men could do that, but like we always had Angela Merkel as like she was always there. I never saw a different government, and so a lot of our early protests were, you know, we protested against her government because we saw that Germany had this legacy of renewable energy but had shut down that industry. We lost 100,000 jobs alone in the solar industry because of those laws that pushed out that industry. We saw Germany failing at, you know, we didn't even have a climate law, like we didn't even have very clear climate goals in any way whatsoever. And so what Merkel did really well was, they always said she's good in a crisis. But she was very bad at the climate crisis. And so we, had now a legacy in Germany of her government which failed to invest in lots of things, but also in the climate and green transition, that failed to invest in schools that are falling apart, that failed to invest in roads that are falling apart, that failed to tell a compelling story about where the country was going and what it was doing. And so I guess the climate crisis wasn't one that she was good at. I think also because the nature of it is obviously different. And so a lot of the things that we're doing now is cleaning up what her government did. And we have to give that to them, when we protested and when we were out on the streets, they did some cool stuff when they were put under pressure. They responded, we think partly by accident. They introduced a really strict climate law. We think they didn't quite know what they were doing because they had never made climate laws before. But whatever, we'll give that to them. And so, kind of mixed on that side.
The classic Marco.
I have a question. Luisa, you mentioned, highlighted the question of language.
Yeah.
And at the same time you said, or I want to ask you, why did you describe it as karma that the most progressive coalition of Germany might collapse?
I was just joking.
Ah,
I think this is a karma of Christian Lindner. But I'm not. I think there's many, I don't even know how to comment on it.
I wanted to ask a question about the work that you're doing in building coalitions and working together with perhaps community activists as well. So for instance, recently you stopped the gas field from happening off the coast, right off the northern coast, by working together with community activists that have been working on it for a long time. Can you describe how you see your role in maybe supporting them or reaching out to other movements that are fighting similar but maybe not the same fights?
Yeah, I explained it recently as we bring the spice. So there was this super crazy plan in the north, in the north of Germany. We have some islands. People don't know that. They don't think of Germany in the islands, but they're there. And then there's the ocean, and there's this Dutch company that wants to open a gas field right on the sea border between the Netherlands and Germany, and they're going to drill down, and it's a UNESCO Nature World Protected Site, but they want to drill into it and get some gas and export that then to the Netherlands and Germany. And everyone on the island is against it because this island has its only industry is tourism, and people come there for the clean air and the clean water and the pristine nature. It's a place where people with asthma go to recuperate their lungs. And so not a great place to start pumping fossil fuels from the ground, to start putting an industry, planting it in the water in front of this island. And so, and people on this island have been fighting against it for a long time. They had gone to court again and again. The mayor had gone and tried to write all these letters to all these people. There was this community organization that had brought people together. There were different NGOs working on it. But when we heard about their fight and we called them up. They were really tired. They were really, really tired and really exhausted. And I talked to one of the, he was like the head of this community organization, and I said, yeah, so we're thinking of coming by. We're going to bring some activists to the island. He's like, okay, yeah, we've done demonstrations before.
No,
We don't think anyone's going to come. And
I think they were tired, but most importantly, they didn't believe that anything could be done anymore. They had stopped believing in themselves and in the possibility of change, right?
Yeah,
There was no
they didn't
window.
They didn't see a route to success anymore. They didn't like have that. This imagination of how it could go had been lost.
And that is a very powerful thing, like at that moment, that this is not there anymore. People get so enthusiastic with providing excuses of why it isn't working anymore. So the moment, and maybe I guess we all know this in our daily lives, that if like there's one thing and we kind of want to get out of it, we are so easy in producing like more facts of why this was a stupid idea in the first place, and it's not going to work out, and they're not going to show up, and they have this whole list of things that would immediately pop up, saying, and then the restaurants, they might not like it if there's another protest because it's at the promenade and, they need the spaces. And also, no, isn't it a weekend, so people are really booked out, and so they would not just discourage themselves, but they would discourage everyone else for even trying.
Yeah, anyway, so then we went anyway.
Yeah.
And it was amazing, and we had this small island, only 5,000 people live there year round, and we had a demonstration with 2,000 people, which is the biggest demonstration this area has ever seen. Like, not just that island, but like all the islands, that whole area of Germany, like the whole region had never seen a demonstration of this size. And people were so happy we were there. We've never had such a warm welcome, I think, ever, anywhere before. The bakery made buns, and pretzels for everyone, and the bar gave us free drinks, and the church gave us a free place to sleep with all our activists. And I think that, so what we do is we meet people at like eye level where they're at, and we make sure that what we're doing, like we don't want to come in somewhere at the end of the day. That demonstration was mostly people from the island, but I think we really see our role as like creating like meaning and creating an image of how things could go differently. And I think that's the spice we brought in, right? Is determination, but there's also the possibility where we actually still believe we can win this fight. And so we did. Yeah, the gas field is on pause indefinitely at the moment.
And I think we really try to think of the missing link, and that's something that conversations we had with people across the East Coast here as well. We try to think of that as like, what is the thing that would maybe change the game? And for them, it was appreciation from the outside, because they had done all the rallying they could do with their own resources, and they felt they had failed. And so there was no one left that could stand up and say, well, let's try again, because everyone would say, well, we've tried and we failed. But one of the missing links that we identified was people from the outside could change that. Because they wouldn't, bring in this whole legacy of failure, but they would bring in an idea of hope, and we would bring press from the outside, which changed the game. And I think we identified the power of tourism. So we've never worked with like enthusiastic and like angry tourists before. It's not usually like our cool kind of group. But we found out that many of those folks who kind of went even and took it's a long train journey to this island. You have to take a long ferry. It only runs so and so often. And so I did this video and I said, hey, I've never been on this island. I'm so excited. And tomorrow we're going. And so many people approached us. They saw that video and they said, well, I'm going there every single year on holiday. And if she's coming now, she's never been there, I should show up because I really care about this place, because this is my holiday destination. And so we got these like angry and committed tourists there who have like their whole childhood memories like made up of that island. And they would come and bring in this whole outrage about someone taking away their childhood memory, which we found, I think, was very unexpected and new. There's a question.
Yeah, first off, it's really cool hearing about what you guys are doing, have done, will continue to do. I'm wondering, and maybe you guys have gotten to this point, or maybe not, but in relation to like the global south, right? I know what's recently been in the news as of late in regards to Germany is like the relationship with Namibia as a result of colonialism and things of that nature. And obviously, I feel like y'all represent a different piece of that experience, like doing the reconciliatory work that y'all are doing. But I'm wondering how those global north, global south dynamics show up in you guys' work, and what you guys do to like navigate that.
Beautiful question. Quickly brings us back to the nuclear question. One of my most, I think, most like speechless moments in my youth was a trip that I was part of to Namibia, where we saw the uranium mine. And those folks would stand there, they were my age. I was in school, I was 16, and we had this long field trip to Namibia because there would be like a partnering school and they would bring us together as teams. And I was 16, I was thinking about like prom and all these things and getting my driver's license, and I was standing next to those guys, they were also 16, and in that class, in that school in Namibia, you knew that those who had a watch were the ones who had a father that worked in the uranium mine. These were the only ones who could afford a watch. But you would also know that before they would graduate, they would go to the funeral of their own dads. That was a story that they would tell. And that uranium went to Germany, right? So to our nuclear plants. So I don't think that we are equipped in any way. I mean, the existence on a European continent, the existence as people in Germany is a burden to the world. That's how it is. The way of living in the Western world is the end of living for most parts of the world. And nobody's teaching us any appropriate approach to that. To not like completely like push away all of that knowledge for the sake of an easier life, or not to drown in the sadness and the injustice that we are producing just by being part of a society that is living such a disproportionate life. We don't know how that is even, like we are not emotionally equipped, we don't get the training to be part of that injustice and this new proximity that the crises are producing. You know, we're all neighbors, we are not at all ones, we're all like on a molecular on a level, yeah, we're all, it's all one. And what I don't think it was helpful. I think that we didn't know about or didn't think about this so much at the beginning of our activism. But basically, when we as activists work in Germany, what we're working against is not bad laws necessarily or ignorant governments. It's a story that a country like Germany tells itself, which is a story of extraordinary strength coming from extraordinary darkness. And it's how this nation rebuilt itself after fascism, because we're very hard workers and we're very intelligent and we are great engineers. No one would ever mention the exploitation, the colonialism, the extractivism, the resources not coming from this country, the destruction,
workers not coming from our country.
The workers coming from other countries, and the atmosphere paying the price and the living life, right? That wouldn't be part of that story. So when we say, hey, could we look at our emissions a bit, and could we look at the resource, and could we consider where the stuff that we are burning is coming from, we are not just arguing for a better climate policy, we are dismantling, if we like it or not, maybe the most important story that this country needs to listen to again and again and again in order to be a nation, to be an identity. And so the extreme right is always saying, oh, the left is starting this culture war, of course, and then they whine about, I don't know, gender neutral toilets, but eventually what we're seeing is, of course, all this is a question of culture and identity. How could it not be? Because this whole culture that we're living in now is rooted in all these exploitative systems, and someone will have to discuss it. So obviously there's going to be a question of what culture are we living in, what identity is ours. And to answer your question, long story short, it is incredibly difficult. And I think the most difficult part for us is not acknowledging the dependencies. It's not finding the great ways in which we collaborate across the continent. We build alliances with folks from all different kind of parts of the world. We bring them to Germany. We crash AGMs and bring in people from places where they're directly affected. All of that is manageable. But I think the worst part for us is the compromise. That in order to be a political entity in Germany, to stay a political entity that has power and is heard, we have to find a ground on which we can operate, and that always means not talking about stuff at one point or the other. It means always focusing and prioritizing on that one thing that we want to get through, knowing there's so much more that needs to get done. And I think that is emotionally error, right? I think that is what makes it so hard. It's that we know it's not sufficient ever.
Thank you for that answer.
Do you think that maybe just in y'all's experience, but like, do you think Germany's in a position to be doing reparations, and if so, is that happening?
To answer the, and I'm gonna do what Luisa's just said, right? I'm gonna prioritize the fights, and that's maybe doing an injustice to your question, right? But I think the answer is we should turn off the bath water before we start mopping up the floor, right? And so in that case, it means we need to stop destroying the climate, and we need to stop the current destruction, because that's wreaking havoc, before we can even start working on and talking about like what we've done before. And we've done a lot, because Germany is, the fourth largest historic emitter, and so that we have a lot of responsibility just looking on that front.
And legally, of course, we need to pay reparations, but I think that the courts will make us do it, not our politics.
Yeah, but then I think there's, I don't know what we like. I think there's so much, we owe so much, right? And so that can happen in the form of, and I think still that's not even addressing the past, but if we look towards, helping other countries pay adaptation costs, helping other countries pay for losses and damages concerned with the climate crisis, all that is not even really entering the sphere of reparations yet, right? But it's a space where even there we're not really contributing our fair share. And so I think that that's a correct, I feel that's so hard to say, but I don't even know when we'll get to that point, when we'll have the space to start having that conversation, because so much is already falling apart in this current moment. And so,
not saying that we're not pushing.
I guess this is my own moment where I cannot imagine that yet.
I was gonna say, do you guys think that Germany is a place for us to be learning from y'all? Because we have one of the most powerful voices in the world, and we're not doing shit.
Yeah.
And I say that kindly and respectfully. But in 30 years, we've actually cut 1% emissions here. So can we be following y'all's example?
And that is maybe actually good news, right? I think European emissions, it's all the way you count it, but European emissions dropped by more, 3-4% last year, more than they ever did in a long, long time, because people try to get there. We don't know, if you look at it holistically, probably some of that is going to be exported to somewhere else. But it's so painful. I don't think people are aware that a political shift of the right in Germany could mean even less international spending is going to be put on the table, because at least right now there's some money being put on the table from Germany. But if this was only possible with a quite progressive foreign ministry that kind of was the most honest, was very careful how much they would communicate to their own finance ministry. But when we're looking at the next climate conference, the one in Brazil in particular, it's going to be a disaster if we have a right-leaning government at that point that is going to push back on so many of these things. It's going to bring back all these hateful myths around them taking money from us.
On a positive note, I think that I mean, what we're really proud of is that we are exiting coal. Like, not 100%, it's not all tied up in a bow nicely, but at least in West Germany, we're going to stop mining coal in Germany in 2030, and we're going to replace that with renewables. And I think that is quite an incredible story, that an industrialized country that has built its identity on coal, right? Like this whole story Luisa was telling, from the darkness we grew, and that was powered by coal, right? And the fact that it was a lot of movement work, it was a lot of, took really hard work. The fact that we are now at a point where there's pretty much consensus in German society that sooner or later we are going to stop mining that shit and stop burning it, that's incredible, I think, in a way. And I think that's a story that maybe we can tell, and where people can learn from us, that we can get together and we can decide to stop exploitation. And maybe it's a ways away, but I think if this country did that on oil and gas, that would be such a service to the world.
No pressure, guys.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, so I'm Abe Newman, I'm sorry, I'm coming to this conversation late, but I really thought it was very powerful. I wanted to raise an issue that I personally find so vexing, which is the way that the technological revolution, particularly around AI, is increasingly running against our efforts to meet the climate, and the amount of energy that is being consumed for something that has no real use purpose yet, and the amount of like economic attention. And the thing that I find so troubling is that people look up to new technology and they get very excited about it. And so it's something that has a narrative. It's not like coal, where people are kind of like, that's an old thing. It's like, and often these future technologies have run in concert with the clean transition. So it's solar and wind and these things that we've been like, electric cars. And so I'm just wondering, I really thought your comment about language was so powerful, but how do you think about shaping this conversation in a way that we can have, or maybe we can't, have a technological change around AI that is compatible with the climate transition? Or how do you think about just kind of framing that fight? Because I find it, all the advances that the US has made in this last few years around the IRA could completely be consumed by this technology that is like autocorrect on steroids. But anyway, I turn.
That's a beautiful question, and so I'm going to bring in this German philosopher who I'm reading a lot lately, and he's called Günther Anders. And Helena's laughing because I quote this guy all the time. And he was working in the light of the atomic bombs in the 60s and 70s. And he would make this, I find, incredible as we would make this point saying humanity has improved its power of production so much. We can produce the most absurd things, even an atomic bomb, and we can produce AI. But we haven't in any comparable way advanced our power of imagination. And you would say there's power of production, which is out in the world, so we can produce all sorts of things. But we don't have the capacity to imagine what this stuff that we invent could mean for us. Which means that we produce an atomic bomb, but no one could even spin their head around, or get their head around what the effects would be of such an, we couldn't morally, ethically, but even logistically couldn't imagine that. We know that the disaster of Fukushima hit so bad because engineers built some walls too low, because they couldn't imagine, they knew that mathematically waves could come and crash the whole plant, but they couldn't imagine that actually happening. They decided against building the walls as high as necessary around Fukushima and the nuclear plant. And I think that guy, Anders, he has been very, very right, and unfortunately he is still alive. We produce stuff for which we don't have moral, emotional, societal, political, or any what kind of concepts to hold space for that kind of invention. Because we're so good at innovating and so bad in kind of innovating morally. And his colleague Hans Jonas would say progress is eating itself up, and I think that's the very thing we're seeing right now. One innovation is invented to kind of fix the other, to fix the other, to fix the other, to fix the other, until right now, I guess, the price we're paying is no longer just a resource, but it's our mental state that is going downhill with AI-generated propaganda and so on. And so, as you would now say, obviously we need logistical answers to the AI question. So where's the energy coming from, and how does the cooling work, and how to maybe even regulate that? I think there's lots of logistical, policy, material answers that we need to give. And I think places like Germany, actually, who are a bit more backwards looking on technology, might be a place where some of that is figured out, because people just don't like technology so much, and they're very scared of anything that's new. And I think we are seeing some of these debates happening. And I think the more worrisome part for me is not the logistical material part of that, but it's a moral part. And I remember very well, I was working with an institution a while back, I think it was maybe 8 years ago, where they tried to figure out what killer drones could mean, killer robots they called them. And there was a big initiative, maybe you remember that, Stop Killer Robots. It was a big coalition worldwide saying don't let drones shoot people. That was by the time where drones were something you would maybe learn about if you were a tech geek, but you wouldn't know about it. And what is it, 10 years down the road, that's how wars are being fought. And people don't even consider the ethic dimension of that anymore. And so I think what we need to look at when it comes to AI and climate and futures, we need to think about what is it that we're producing and what is our moral understanding of what the implications could be. And for some that sounds like very wishy-washy and that's such a feel-good debate to have. And I guess because we didn't have enough of these debates in the past, because we didn't think about the consequence of production on a moral or societal level, we ended up in so many, being surrounded by machineries that you cannot really justify in their existence. So I think that is where we are at. And obviously now what's happening, and I think that's very, obviously it's almost cynical that, AI comes and then, they provide like 5 advantages. They say, oh look, but we can have better climate modeling, and we can do better, they have like a little package, like a little gift box. Take that, get distracted while they go out. And I think in some countries we're seeing AI being like some of the largest source of emissions already, just because of the electricity.
More questions?
Since Volkswagen was in the news this week about its declining fortunes.
Yeah, that's because of us, because we hate cars.
No, and also because you brought up emissions. Is there any connection with that scandal of the emissions with Audi and Volkswagen? So that's partly responsible for the decline, and will that affect the whole electric car movement?
I mean, the story of Volkswagen, right, is one where they slept on it. There's this global transition towards electric vehicles.
And they rather invented a global criminal network to trick customers instead of just building electric cars. I mean, the priorities.
Yeah. And so now they're just behind. They didn't shift their business model fast enough. They thought they would just keep with their traditional thing, and they knew better. And there was a CEO, right, who was really vocal about it, and they fired him because he was too ambitious on electric vehicles. And it's quite a tragic story in a sense, right? Because while they gave I think 4.6 billion euros to their shareholders last year, now they're talking about closing all these factories. And the people who pay for this are not the management and the board and the CEO of Volkswagen who made such a large strategic mistake, but it's the people working there. Thankfully, we have unions and we have workers' rights, but it's quite. And now what they're doing, so they're turning around and now they're asking the EU to scrap their combustion engine exit, right? Which is going to be a big fight. We have to fight next year, and it's quite tragic that a company that wasn't fast enough and that has completely tried to look has ignored the 21st century in all its shapes and forms happening around it, and think they can just continue the business model of the 20th century and like get by with that. And when they realized it was a bit difficult, they tried to create a global criminal network to try and continually like get through with what they were doing. And if we then see that politics like yields to that, then we're in big trouble. So we're gonna try and hold the line and set the standard.
Well, we have come to the end of our time. I do want to end with one final question, and it sort of goes to this idea of building these coalitions. So following up on what Marika was talking about, you just mentioned a big fight coming up at the EU, possible short or snap elections or early elections coming up in Germany. What can those of us in the climate environmental justice space in the United States do to support you? You come here, you helped us, you shared your ideas with us. How can we help you as you continue your work? I'm offering, by the way, all of you volunteers.
I'm not sure if you've already talked about it, but like let's get be on Tuesday, like it's a
Yeah, okay,
Tuesday
Tuesday's a good thing.
and
Good start.
then we talk again. No, honestly, like I think one of the big things, right, is that's going to affect all of us in the future is the question of fossil fuels, of LNG, of that big fossil oil and gas export business of the US, and 70% of LNG imports in Germany are coming from the US. So there's a big connection between Germany and Europe and the US. And right, we're going down to Louisiana and Texas next week to meet some folks there, but I think we will need to, like we really need you guys to step up on these questions. We're going to do it from our side, but you know, export-import questions mean, you know, we need to tackle it from all sides and make the case for an end of that expansion which is happening, but the number of new export terminals are being built right now, which is not, you know, save jobs. It's you know what it does. But yeah, and that I think is one very practical thing we're looking at these days.
And then honestly, I think you guys have enough issues here. You guys are doing this. There's so much amazing work happening, and like we take so many stories and fights and losses and wins back with us to Germany. Like, but you know, I think that most of all we will build coalitions and we need them, but I think most of all we just have to trust that people are fighting the good fight on both sides of the Atlantic and doing the work to fight the industries, to fight the polluters, to fight for, you know, emissions reduction and climate justice. And as long as we're doing that, and you guys are doing that, then I think we have a pretty good basis.
I wanted to see you.
No.
I wanted to see your face.
There's a Formosa truck on the road.
Really?
They're fun.
She just
That's
Wow.
That's some high end.
I don't know what kind of earth that is.
But that, ending on a nice view, ending
Yeah.
we know what's ahead, we know what's
Please.
I was going to ask you, since I know this company, you raised an important point about Tuesday coming up. What did the effect, or what are the eyes of Germany views come up on the election, and how would that affect your efforts? Like, what you all see? How the significance of it?
Thank you for asking the question.
And
Yeah.
we really like, so we have this big thing we don't like people, we had sometimes asked like what advice would you give to other movements, and we really come here with this lens of humbleness because things are tough here and we don't want to like lecture or anything. We are very, obviously Germany is not it's a complicated space right now, and it's not that there's a white vest that we are wearing in that country currently, but I guess on those questions of like drawing lines between democracies and authoritarianism, I think like we are really like, I don't think you can underestimate the effects of that election for the world and for places like Europe. You cannot. And I think that for us one of the most disturbing things was to witness this notion of, well, I don't like both candidates, and I think we say this with all respect, saying this is not between candidates anymore. And we really try to carry that weight from the past with us because it's still out there and things are going to come back, and it's not a single way towards democracy. These things bounce back, and for us, and the US has this chance and responsibility and scary duty right now to, with everything that we can, to set a sign here and to make sure that we hold the line.
Thank you. All right, thank you everybody for the